I can see it.
I don't know. I wanted to do a ritual thing, but like it works if there's a bunch of people, but there's less people. It feels a bit exposed.
All right, well, good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. Welcome online and in person to Concordia University's fourth space. Thanks so much for joining us for today's event, Creating the Game That Will Save the World, a ritual brainstorm. Welcome to our cast of folks joining us online and in person, panelists and audience members alike, and to our moderator, Alexandre Franchi. We are currently streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We would like to extend our gratitude to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters we're meeting on here today, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. At Fourth Space, what do we do? Well, we work with our university community here, faculty, students, and staff to activate the ongoing research projects and initiatives with the goal of co-creating knowledge and building community. And we do so by producing daily hybrid events and activities such as this one that are free and open to the public. So once again, welcome to all. It's been our pleasure to collaborate with Alexandre for the past couple of weeks, and in fact, I guess months, in developing a project here in Fourth Space. Alexandre is a filmmaker, in part interested in exploring myth, fantasy, and humor as a means of coping with trauma. And he came to Fourth Space via his Masters of Design research project looking at transformative narratives beyond the screen, but he could tell you more about that. He'll also be facilitating this conversation here today. So I'll pass the mic to you now, Alexandre. Welcome.
Thank you. So, I wanted to make this a bit of a ritual brainstorm because I wanted to be informal, and I wanted us to also, because we deal with ritual, we deal with archetypes, we deal with madness, we deal with games and game design. So I wanted to introduce a little playful thing into it, and you're not obliged to do it, but you could also make the sound of your favorite mythical animal or grotesque sound. So mine is like, which is like the cockatrix, which is a mythical bird. I think when you heard the sound, it killed you or turned you into stone. So that's because when I was a kid, everybody thought I had a big nose and called me Big Bird. And so that was my call. So I just wanted to share that with you as, you know, trying to shed a bit of the ego and to embrace the ridicule and the carnivalesque, which is something that I've embraced in my life through past hardships. And that connected me to this research and has connected me to a bit of your work. So I'll just start with a quote before I introduce you all to everybody. And that's a quote I've learned in design, because as a filmmaker, design for me was very strange. And it was a design theorist and philosopher, Tony Fry, who linked the care of the self with the future of our species and the future of our planet. And he quoted philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty in saying that we humans are the flesh of the world. And so my question is, like, how do we human mammals in this hyper-modern, hyper-capitalistic world care for the self and the flesh of the world? And my research creation here, as Anna said, involved working with young people, high school dropouts, and to explore play, ritual, and the carnivalesque humor to break the cycle of low self-esteem and alienation that's affecting them. Because we have a very high school dropout rate here, which is close to 19% for boys and 13% for girls. But really deep down, what I want to do is I'd like to start a cult. I'd like to start a new myth. And it's a bit hubristic. But years ago, when I was very sick, I came across a quote from Joseph Campbell that said, "The old gods are dead or dying, and people everywhere are searching, asking, what is the new mythology to be? The mythology of this unified earth as one harmonious being." So in my director hubris, I said to myself, well, I'll take a crack at it. And so I embarked on this project that led me to Concordia and led me to meet you, some of you, and meet the work of some of you. So I'll go a bit chronologically in how I got acquainted to your work. First, there's Professor Rilla Khaled, my thesis supervisor, professor here in Design and Computational Arts at Concordia, whose research interests span the design of learning and persuasive games, interactions between games and culture, procedural content generation, and speculative play work, and particularly also for me, anyway, participatory design. which is something that I really dove into in the project thanks to her help. Then I met also Louis David Tremblay, who's a fantasy writer who writes fantasy, but also a senior game designer in Montreal's vibrant game industry. And he has worked at Behavior Studios, at Ubisoft, at Eidos, and now he's the lead designer at Invoke Studios. And he's working on a AAA Dungeons and Dragons game. And we've met over the years in the pandemic, and we shared the same cafe. And so we started talking, and we realized, oh, we're Dungeons and Dragons players, we're fantasy lovers, so archetypes, you know, and fantasy. So I thought it would be great for him to be here also as a means to, well, get the lens of the industry and the jargon of the industry, just to see, well, because as you know today, young people need humor. They need psychological risk to grasp the world, and they also need heroes and escape in fantasies to have role models and navigate difficult situations. And nowadays, and we were talking about this just before the meeting started, well, we're all hooked and addicted to the dopamine hit for our iPhones, and young people engage in social media challenges and TikTok challenges, and they play a lot of games. And so technology is there, and it's doing great things at times, and it's also wreaking havoc at times. And the discussion, the informal discussion, was try to see what we were doing down there in Brazil. And I say down there because it's on the map, you know, the America-centric map that we have. And here at Concordia, and then see, okay, well, how could this be spread through technology, and how maybe we could work with technology and maybe social media to perhaps engage in activities that are healing, if it's at all possible. Maybe it's utopian and that thing will be recuperated by consumer capitalism. I don't know. But anyway, it's worth a shot discussing this. Vitor, I met your work so Vitor Pordeus is a community physician, immunologist, transcultural psychiatrist, and actor, living in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and he founded the Madness Hotel and Spa, the Dionysus Theater and Popular University for Art and Sciences in the oldest Brazilian public asylum, and he currently is seeing patients in Rio and at the Dionysus Theater Clinic. And what I was particularly struck with the work is that he works with people who come from, who need psychiatric help, and he works with them in putting together plays that involve madness. Hamlet, the Mad King, and Dionysus, which was also the god of wine, theater, and madness. And also he's been working with children in the community. So his work for me involves many things that I'm interested in and one of them is the performance through and in front of the community, for the healing to take place with the community, which reminds me of Victor Turner and the Rites of Passages, in which he says that the people, when they change life stages, they need to be recognized by their entire community. And which is something that really then probably marks the subconscious, or establishes them in a new role, or calls the community to question its own values and practices, which is also the role of theater, or as Victor Turner says, theater is something that's derived from rites of passages, and it could be an object of transferable wisdom and knowledge, and so could games. So that's for the introduction. I'll start with our guest from Brazil and my question. So this is an informal conversation. I'll ask questions, but we could all ask questions to each other. Audience members could ask questions, particularly the cultural anthropologists in the audience. Yeah, it is just to basically like a bit of a brainstorm and a little bit of a spitballing on a couple of ideas of what we've been up to, what we've been doing, and see if certain things we find out in our neck of the woods apply or could be transferred to the different cultures or the different fields. So, that's it basically. Okay, so Vitor, I have so many questions for you, so I'm going to start with one and maybe just answer part of it because I may have 3 questions in one. I'll start with, and this links to participant design also, how you get people, I don't want to say recruit, but how do you get your actors and your patients, and the play that you put together, to what extent is it scripted and to what extent it emerges, and then you've got a broad skeleton and then it emerges, and if you could take us through the process a little bit of that, because that's a bit of a design work actually, if we want to use that term.
So thank you very much, Alexandre, and thank you the Concordia University community and the people from Montreal, where I have lived. I lived in Montreal from 2015 to 2018. And I'm a professor in the McGill University Division of Transcultural Psychiatry. I teach in the Art and Healing course with Dr. Jasmine Gusder, who is a Montreal transcultural psychiatrist. She is a very interesting person. She's there right now teaching in McGill. When you talk how do I recruit people, I work as a physician. So people hire me and they come for me looking for medical aid and usually psychiatry. I see a lot of psychiatric patients. So now in the last 5 years that I'm running the theater clinic, the Dionysus theater clinic, I have been seeing my community, and I've been seeing all kinds of clinical cases like appendicitis, thyroiditis, and pneumonias and COVID. And mainly I start clinical work and clinical, I do the anamnesis of people. That's a very important measure. You have to join the memories of people. That's what's therapeutic, and that's what is healing. When people come with in crisis or in psychic suffering, in persistent psychic suffering, and we start joining their histories and joining the history of the family and joining the history of the community. And invariably we find traumas. Invariably we find childhood traumas. We find sexual traumas, sexual violence, and that's epidemic. And this is happening globally everywhere. And that's what Freud said in the early 20th century and the end of the 19th century, that we had a population of people that suffered violence in childhood, and then they would develop neurotic disorders or even psychotic disorders when in adult age, and in adolescence, young adult, in adult age. So what I do primarily as a physician is joining memories. And I started this work 14 years ago in the public asylum of here in Rio, which is the National Asylum. It's the oldest asylum founded by the Portuguese emperor in 1852. And when I started there, I had already been through my own medical burnout. I suffered a burnout when I was in the middle of the medical school, and that resulted in severe depression, in a suicidal ideation. And at some point, instead of committing suicide as a physician, as a young physician, I went back to theater because I had been playing theater since when I was 9 years old. And also, very importantly, role-playing games and video games in my adolescence and a young age. But when I started medical school, I had to stop it. And they told me to stop the theater. That was a bad advice. And then I had recovered from my medical burnout with theater. And I had this invitation to build a department for culture and health in the public health office of Rio. And that took me to the asylum, to the oldest asylum, where I got to meet the work of Dr. Nise da Silveira, who was this woman physician who became the pioneer in Jungian psychology. in analytical psychology in Latin America, and she had worked with Jung, and she founded in that asylum here in Rio the Museum of the Images of the Unconscious, which is it's the largest museum for art and psychiatry in the world. When I saw that work, and when I got to understand her work, I decided to use the theater I knew how to play as a way to work with the images of the unconscious and the patients. And that's when I think we get all connected, because the images of the unconscious, they are present everywhere. And we are all inside the images. We are governed by the images. As Gregory Bateson said, the eye of the mind cannot discriminate the images. We are invaded by images all the time, and we are governed by images. And images are emotions, and emotions are images. So when you have a psychotic patient, he's invaded by a train of images. He's invaded by a train of images affections, which are the Jungian, which is the Jungian theory for archetypes. So archetypes are conserved images, affections throughout our history. And when action meets the ancestral image, high discharges of psychic energy may happen, and this may lead to psychopathology and mental disease, or even religious experience, pedagogic experience, ritual experience. So I started playing in this asylum. Instead of being a normal physician with a white coat and stamps, I decided not to play the physician, but to play as an actor. And I had the opportunity to play inside this asylum for 7 years. In 2016, there was this coup d'etat in Brazil. They knocked out the woman president, Dilma Rousseff, and they fired my work, and they closed the Madness Hotel and the theater, the Dionísio Theater, because of the positive results. We were having incredible results in severe mental illness, in schizophrenics and chronic psychotic people that were arrested inside the asylum for 50 years. And that's why I escaped to Canada, because I knew the government was trying to destroy my work, and I needed to publish it, and I needed to produce a thesis, and I needed to publish papers and find partners. And I went to Canada, and I started this work in the Division of Social Transcultural Psychiatry. Then I returned to Brazil in 2018, and I restarted the work as a community basis, no government anymore. You cannot trust the government here. And whenever you have a positive and profitable results in the clinical realm, they may attack you and chase you, because the public health system is a very corrupted system here in Brazil and in Rio. So that's when I learned how to work with the images and work not with the words that patients speak, but the images that they bring, the images that their narratives bring, the images that their performance brings, the image that they draw, the image that they paint, every kind of image. Now I have a lot of adolescents. I have to work and study TikTok and TikTokers and video gamers and YouTubers and all kind of crazy stuff, very psychotic. TikTok is psychotic, yes. TikTok is psychotic, né? Psychotic TikTok, né? Because it's a very psychotic atmosphere, because it's all very non-linear and chaotic, and no establishment of narrative, no establishment of narrativity, which is a very important thing for consciousness. Consciousness is a narrative. It's a narrative of images. So if your images are completely disorganized, your consciousness gets disorganized. And we work reading the images, since from the medical interview and the dialoguing to family therapy and community therapy and when we move into the theater. And we have been working with short movies for YouTube, and our clients have been producing short movies, have been producing animated films, and we value all kinds of production. We don't judge. We dialogue and any kind of. I have a very severe patient. He's very tall and very strong. He's 17 years old. And he would hit the whole family. He would beat everybody, and he was supposed to be hospitalized. But besides playing with theater and drama therapy with him, one of the key connections that we had was through short movies for internet and WhatsApp. He has a genetic disease called tuberous sclerosis. And he is very engaged in producing movies and publishing movies in YouTube and doing all kinds of technology. I have another patient, a 14-year-old. When I asked her, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said, TikToker. So, okay, let's do a TikTok. But what kind of TikToker do you want to be? What kind of content do you want to put in your TikTok? And she said, content? What is that content? I don't know. I don't care. I want to do small dances and I want to do trends. I said, okay, but you need a content in order to dialogue and communicate with people. It can't be only the form. It can't be the empty form. We should use your story and my story. Yes, your story should be the content of that, and your memories and your life story. So we have been doing this a lot. I have a line of patients, and it's all fully packed in the last 3 years since the pandemic started. It's been a lot of work. And I think that this debate about the images of the unconscious and the psychopathology of images and the psychophysiology of images, it's a very urgent public debate. We should be debating this, and we are doing this. We are debating this in a group, in a collective of people, and this should involve the public health and the public mental health and the public education systems, because we are being governed by the images. We are being invaded by the images. We are being completely enslaved by the images, and this is very clear in the psychiatric setting. How people get paranoid, how people, like I had another adolescent who was expelled from the WhatsApp group of the community, of his group, of his adolescents groups, and he got into an emotional crisis, an emotional breakdown with 18 years old. So that's when we start thinking that those images, they are very part of our physiology, of our psychic physiology, and we are in a phase, an historical phase of humanity, that we are using electronic device to produce images. But those images, those ancestral images, those sacred images, those archetypal images, they were all produced in shamanic rituals for millions of years. During millions of years, we depended on shamanic rituals to produce fantastic images. And now we turn on the television, and we turn on the phone, and we have all kinds of psychedelic and fantastic images. And this is clearly damaging the community. It's clearly damaging the global community. We have very clear mental health, public health data showing how suicides are growing, how domestic violence is growing, how sexual abuse is growing, and how mental diseases are growing in the communities in the last 40 years. This had been published. But with the pandemics, it exploded, and 100% of the people have some sort of persistent mental suffering, some persistent neurotic hypochondria. So this should bring public debate on mental health and media. What's the role of media in mental health? What's the role of media in panicking the population? What's the role of media when they show only tragedies? What's the role of video games when they show only violence, when they show only guns? What's the role of movies, the movie industry, when all movies have explosions and guns and sexual appellations? So this is a very important debate that I don't see people from the cultural sector and the movie industry and the television industry and the video game industry interested in debating that or dialoguing about that. So this would be my initial remarks.
Thanks, thank you. I'm going to grab from what you said, the part with the young woman who wanted to be a TikToker, and you're telling to make her story, which leads me a little bit to participant design, a little bit to Rilla's field, which is I was reading your article, procedural literacy and domain expertise, and could domain expertise be our own traumas and anxieties and fears? That's what I found with the young people. They were, a lot of them had addictions because of abandonment issues, and well, they could talk about that, and they could talk to people who also were addicts, and they knew all about it. So I'm trying to maybe develop a method with young people to be like, well, how do we, with participant design and domain expertise, accompany them? And I'm certainly not a therapist. To try to build together their own little narrative that they could put out there and make their own little ritual. They can't control the ocean of images, but at least within the community, and that's what you do too, Vitor, like make their own little narrative and share that with the group of closed ones, to go back to these rituals. So, and this we translate then into like game design and then domain expertise. I don't know if you could jump off of that.
All right, I'll try and work out how to weave these things together. Okay, well, let me, Vitor, thank you for that opener. Really, really fascinating to learn more about your work. I was interested in what you said about TikTok and the idea that it's not necessarily delivering narrative, because I would push back on that. I think that it does, but I think that the narrative is not constituted by a singular video. I think it's constituted by many videos that are explicitly exploring a particular meme or a greater theme. Like, I think that TikTok is operating on you watching a lot of videos that are centered around a particular thematic and sometimes expressly about recreating a meme. Like, for instance, the affordances of the tool will let you, splice in other people's videos and build on top of them. So if we're thinking about how do we get narrative out of TikTok, I think it's probably easier to focus on what could be the big picture outcome rather than trying to solve everything with a single video. Okay, and so I think that there is where these ideas of community and participation really start to make sense for a platform like TikTok, because of course with TikTok, you really want content to get seen. The more people see it, the more likely it is to get pushed. But then part of that also is making sure that your message is of relevance to a particular set of people. So Alex, I'm going to tie this to your work specifically. I know that something that you are interested in is using TikTok as a mechanism for letting people share their existential anxieties, to share them, to, in some sense, release them, but also to inspire others to do the same. So I think if we're thinking about, like, it's interesting also because the length of a standard TikTok video is very short. How long is it?
They recommend doing it between 27 and 34 seconds, which is the ideal, which is basically the length of a television commercial.
Okay, 27 to 34 seconds, the length of a television commercial, hopefully with less production cost than an actual television commercial. And for a lot of people who make content for these platforms, they're able to do this entirely on their own. Okay, but so really what we want then is communities of people who are interested in a particular thematic, potentially sharing existential anxiety, giving some of themselves, and then hoping that that inspires others to do the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, yeah, it's like when you say that it's not the one TikTok video that has a narrative, but many, like let's say those trends, as Vitor was saying. I mean, could they be seen as I mean, you know, of course, there's all the dopamine addictions included in this, so I won't even go into that. But like, could certain trends be seen as certain archetypes that are emerging, or bits of archetypes? I don't know. Like, one of the young ladies that we work with in this research, she had a lot of addictions, a lot of abandonment first when she was young, and a lot of trauma, and that led to the addictions. And she says she's a borderline personality disorder, and she, for instance, every morning she trash talks herself. She says bad things to herself. You know, you're worthless. You're no good. You're worth nothing. You take too much space. You know, and when we were so you know, and she says this. You know, and so we recorded her saying this, Annabelle, and when other young people saw this, and I think you too, it really moved everybody, because they're like, well, I do that. You know, I do that in the morning. When I wake up, I've got all these thoughts coming in, you know, and at one point she said that in her therapy, she's trying to struggle with the fact that she's not her addiction, and she's not that negative voice. And, you know, we're like, well, what are your qualities? And she says, well, I'm courageous, I'm resilient, you know, I don't give up. And then it came about that we had her sing her qualities, and there were a bunch of the other young people that we all sang with her, like the little community of our group, like sang it, you know, like kind of echoed back to her thing. And when she performed that at the youth center in front of the social workers, the psychotherapists, and the other students, it really marked everybody. And so that's what got me thinking for this talk. I was like, okay, well, this little exercise, this little, I called it protection from self-poison. You know, I wanted a Dungeons and Dragons name. So I used ChatGPT to generate a bunch of names, and I chose one. I was like, oh, protection from self-poison. And I was like, well, that could be a short video, you know, with an introduction. And could that be I was like, well, how do we design this? How would we put this out there that other young people might be like, oh, I'm like that? Because there's some things you do, like these mini rituals. If you sing it in front of people and you film yourself, you're gonna have benefits for real. And so then it was like, well, could we start doing this and then putting it out there and see if other people are gonna latch on to this? You know, it's like, and one of the reasons we gathered today was to ask, like, in your practice, like, this is one I saw that connected to a lot of young people, but are there other ones? You know, this is something I would try to.
I want to pick up again, like specifically thinking about community, thinking about social media, and I want to bring up the idea of the loop as well, which I know is probably going to be useful, you know, a useful term for you as well. But the way that a lot of people use social media these days, it is about connecting with their community. Okay, and this might be a community who's not directly in front of their face. A lot of the time people go online to reach out to the sort of people who they wish they had, you know, more representation of in their grounded material lives, but they don't. So if we're thinking about Annabelle, if we're thinking about what was possible in the context of a youth center, these were people who she did a series of workshops with. She developed a huge amount of trust with them as well. And she was able to be vulnerable in front of them. Okay, so trying to translate that to TikTok, I think it could be possible, but the feedback is not going to be immediate, and it's probably going to be more spread over time. And then, yeah, because we're relying on platforms that are very much like, I push some content out, maybe you can talk back at me. We need to think about, what is the loop of engagement? What is the loop of engagement there? Is it that someone like Annabelle makes a video, tags it with particular, potentially she calls them failings. Okay, so let's say anger. Okay, hashtag anger. Or, maybe she's at this point wanting to tag it in a positive way. So she says passion. Okay, so maybe we could use tagging features as a way to tap into these archetypes. So yeah, I think,
I wanted to make a comment on this idea of anamnesis, which is a very deep concept from medicine, because it's been described for 2,500 years ago by the Hippocratic school of medicine from Greece. And he talks about all the time as anamnesis. So I would like to think the video games and the TikToks and the internet as tools for anamnesis, not tools for confusing the memories. Now we are using to confuse the memories. People, I watch, I get hypnotized by short movies during a long time. And when I get out of it, I go dizzy, I get dizzy, I get like in an altered state of consciousness. It looks like I had a drug or something like that. But when we start working for producing the restoration of memories, that's the idea of anamnesis. Plato, he would say that every learning is an anamnesis, actually. That every learning process actually is a way of remembering, ancestral knowledge. It's a way of remembering impressions, of remembering emotions. And when you have traumatic experiences and mental disease, severe mental illness, you have erasure of memories. You have whole parts of the story of that person that have been deleted. So when you start using the relational environment of the internet and the video games, I want to remember too the Brazilian artist Ligia Clark that said there are no art objects, but there are relational objects. So a TikTok is a relational object. A video game is a relational object. A video experience, we are now in a relational space, or as Winnicott said, a transitional space. Why do we get into transitional spaces? Why do we get into relational spaces? As far as I can understand, as a therapist, as a psychiatrist, we do that in order to remember. We do that in order to remember who we are, remember who is our community, remember who is our family, what is the trajectory of our family, what were the experiences of our family. Now in Brazil, and Canada too, but in Brazil is much more violent, we have some sort of psychopathology of colonization, because colonization erased our memories, because Inquisition erased our memories, because slavery erased our memories, and we don't know who we are, and we work against our own community, and we work against our own health, which makes sense in a colonial psychopathology environment, in a colonial situation of my country, which is absolutely colonial for 500 years. So this is about remembering. And when I am in front of a patient, and when I'm working with patients in the theater, I understand that the ritual is the first form of computer that humankind and primates. We are doing rituals much before we became humans. We as gorillas, we were playing rituals. As chimpanzees, we were playing rituals. So rituals exist to remember, to make remembrances, important remembrances, what to eat, how to feed, how to have sex, how to celebrate sex as a ritual, as a community ritual. as a union ritual and as a celebration. So all this is stored in our ritual practices. And when we look into severe trauma, complex trauma, severe mental diseases, we will see that what is broken are the rituals. And that's, it's a very important, what is breaking all the rituals? First of all, was the invention of writing, the invention of the alphabet, 4,000 years ago. And then we had the invention of the print that produced the books and the Bibles and the colonization. And now we have the internet that is changing, and it's mixing all the texts and all the narratives and all the memories. And in every technological revolution, you have huge political and psychopathological events such as wars, holocausts, because people get disoriented and they get violent and they get aggressive. And then when mass psychotic and mass violence happens. So I think that one of the principles that I want to remember, isn't it, is the principle of anamnesis, of relational objects. We are all doing relational stuff. We are in emotional relationships. Images are emotional relationships, and we have to remember. And also, all those projects, and when you get involved with people, with community, with patients, I feel, and I think in my experience, that you should have at least 2 years to work with the population, with the subjects, in order that you have the proper fixation of memories, and the person can sediment her own understanding and her own learning in a healing process. Because I see that from my severe neurosis patients. The more severe patients, no less than 2 years of therapy, in order that the person can remember what happened when her father violated her and had sex with her when she was 6 years old. This takes at least 2 years to make the person safe and be able to make the memory emerge, the anamnesis happen. So it's hard to dig. It's a field hard to dig, because if you touch the trauma without the calmness and the proper safe environment and the proper time to work with this, the person goes into a psychotic break or a neurotic breakdown, a neurotic crisis, and fights with you and runs away and jumps the wall. And, you know, this happens quite frequently in the clinical work.
Yeah.
But I wanted just to make this comment.
No, I get it. So this is where it's interesting because of the different fields we're at. So I'm gonna put you on the spot. I'm gonna put Louis David on the spot, the video games, Dungeons and Dragons industry one. You have a way, I guess, in the industry, and that goes back to perhaps the different psychopathologies Vitor talks about that emerge. I mean, there's many different ones, but I'm sure we see trends, and those hashtags on TikTok, those things that people, these are words, and you know, ideally they'd be images, but it's to see what I guess in the industry you have different kinds of players. You have different kinds of feats within the games, the D&D type games that you know work well, like different kinds of little dramatic segments of story, probably.
Yeah, we do have a recipe. We have to look at who's the target audience. I feel safer knowing that my audience is 18 years plus, because there is quite a bit of violence in Dungeon Dragon typically, even though it's, I guess we could call it gore for the whole family, because it's gelatinous monsters exploding, and so it's all fine. So we're not really dealing with trauma, but we're in the business of teaching. I think every game is a big journey in learning, and you can quantify your success at a game, your rate of improvement by how well you succeed, and then there's the achievement system. but ultimately it's about teaching, and the fun in a game is extracted from the process of learning. And that's where I think video games can have a positive impact. We can teach a lot of good things, namely deferred gratification. That's a thing games often teach, and that's a very precious thing. I think it's going against the tendency of constant acceleration that we see in everything, with the TikTok length of the video, for example, being like 27 seconds. And then probably another platform might come out that says, well, we're 10 seconds.
Yeah, Vine used to do that. I think Vine used to be 6 seconds.
Yeah, around 2012, 13. Yeah, that was a popular thing. So, it's not generally, it's not absolute, but I see a tendency towards acceleration and shorter attention span from players. I mean, we have changed the recipe in the ways that we create games, and I think Hollywood is doing the same, with less dialogue, more action, more explosion. Like, you have to see the explosions now because they're so cheap to make. But at the same time, I think it's detrimental because there's a creative way to suggest an explosion without having to film it, and it's cheaper. And I think it might enrich the movie or the game. And so, but I see this tendency of, no, we have to show it. We have to spend money on that feature. It has to be in the game. It's a back of the box feature. It's going to be great in the trailer. So we have to show the explosion. We can't suggest it, or we can't. So there's some of that. And then there's
like overbidding. Kind of.
Overbidding, yeah, exactly. And also the one that was for me a big realization in because I was always a player-centric designer, always trying to cater to the player to create fun. And then there's the realization that what works best really is not the carrot, but the stick, because the fear of punishment is much greater than the temptation for reward. So that's not super comfortable to admit, but at the same time, we can see it with some series that are very successful, like Dark Souls, which are all about that, is trial and error and learning via being beaten down with a stick rather than being carroted forward, if I can say so. So it's like I can see like the glorification of violence in video games as a net negative, but it's also a representation of those rituals. I think, like Victor was mentioning, that are way old, like back when we were chimpanzees, of defeating the other tribe. So it's sort of a teaching process of showcasing what it takes to achieve victory. And in game design, it's all about that. It's about telling the player what the limits are to the game, what the rules are, what the conditions for victories are. And I think that's where the challenge lies in your carnivalesque endeavor of
Psychological risks of the people.
Exactly, is the quantification and identification of the victory conditions. Because that's where the games emerge. The difference between a toy and a game is the toy has no victory condition. It's just a ball on the table. There's no winning at touching it or poking it. But the minute I put lines and goals and offside, I set a set of rules, a set of constraints that players have to abide by. Now it becomes a game. Now it becomes interesting, and the fun comes out of that. So in an ironical sense, we sort of squeeze fun out of adding constraints on people. So the curtailing of freedom can also be a positive experience, weirdly, where we find more fun in respecting rules to achieve a goal than if there are no rules. And the example for that is what I was telling you just before the conference is, well, if I put your D&D character at infinite HP, the game is immediately less fun. If I give you the infinite rocket launcher as your first gun in the game, you're gonna wonder why the pew pew is in the game at all, because there's no purpose to it anymore. So all of that rules ecosystem is what you derive a game from. So I think that's where the challenge lies, is in, like you were saying, creating the game loop, tying all the game mechanics together into a fine loop that makes for replayability and, the fun emergent gameplay, basically.
Yeah, thanks. I like the squeeze fun out of adding constraints on people. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I found that it's not related, but a little bit related. When I was doing exercise with the young people, the carnivalesque exercise, trying to tell their story, express their anxieties, we started adding constraints that were weird constraints. For instance, stand on one leg while you're talking to us about something, and then the person forgot the stress, and it was a different kind of constraint. But then they were able to do it. Or I worked with the carnivalesque a bit, so it was reversal. So there were strange constraints, like, okay, you have to do a task. Like a young woman had some trauma from a previous boyfriend. We're talking like violence, restraining order, prison for the guy. And she used to sing, and singing reminded her of her deceased father, and it was a source of solace. So part of her little ritual was to sing in front of people, but she was kind of shy. And so at one point, we added a constraint as a group. Was like, all right, your constraint is you cannot sing well. You have to sing badly, which is a strange reversal carnivalesque constraint, right? Which is like the opposite. We're talking about how to practice the carnivalesque, and then all of a sudden, well, okay, I have to sing badly. So it's like
it's immediately more fun. Because
it created something weird, right? Then it was more about letting go of the emotions and going crazy and being super outgoing, and everybody got into it. And so that created the basis for her little ritual.
A good place to explore, in my opinion, maybe, and it's sort of playing with what we call in game design the mental load that we're requiring of a player as they undertake gameplay activities. There's so much you can request from a player to understand and remember at the same time. Like, you can't give them like a rotation of 80 spells to remember right off the bat. It has to be a very long process if you're going to take it that high. So you can typically require them to remember a few distinct things. But going back to the previous student you had with you that used to shout negative reinforcement to herself, well, you could have that whole exercise with her, like the rather than standing on one leg, maybe forbidding words or types of words, negative words. And then what you'd see, in my opinion, is the sort of spontaneity fighting against the rule set that you just established. And then the interpretation of like whether that's a negative word, because you have a gray zone in vocabulary, where was that a bad term? Yeah, well, you used it negatively about yourself, and that's we're trying to forbid that. So it's sort of, and I think it would create fun where now they have to watch what they're saying, but have to have a meaningful conversation that's spontaneous at the same time. So we're trying to catch them using bad words against their own self. So whatever their trauma is and what their bad tendency is that you're trying to fight, you should build rules around that. And constraints, like I was saying, might elevate the, because you're setting rules, you're setting victory conditions. I have to go through this I have to tell you about my whole day experience, let's say, that's the exercise, but without ever using a negative word. So now I have to watch for what I say and jump through hoops and get to the finish line. So there's immediately an objective that is set, is I have to finish telling you about my journey, my day, my journey through that day, but do so throughout a set of constraints, jump through hoops, jump over fences, duck under some other fences. So that that creates a gameplay. And then if there's a reward at the end, that's even better.
Can I jump in with some thoughts on this?
Sure,
All right.
sure.
Okay, so I'm thinking about this idea of games versus toys, the major difference being rules and outcome. And I think it actually connects very well to Vitor's work in cross-cultural psychiatry. Vitor, I'm going to make a connection just because my own background research is partly on cross-cultural psychology, not psychiatry. But one reason why I started working with games in the first place was because of rules and how naturally they map to our ideas of how we carry ourselves in the world. You know, what's considered good, what's considered bad, what's considered right, what's considered wrong, what is noble, what is ignoble. And the amazing thing about games when people sit down to play them is that immediately they are trying to acculturate to a new culture. Okay, they're trying to work out, how do I win in this world, right? So I think that's very much the type of thing that you were telling us right now. So if we're going to tie this to what you have been doing with people in workshops, I think we need to also make sure that we retain the spirit of the carnivalesque, because the thing that you just proposed now of we have the singing, or we have someone talking about themselves, but they're no longer allowed to use bad words. This sounds just like cognitive behavioral therapy, actually. Yeah. But then if you told any of these students, hey, let's do a CBT exercise together, then they're going to be like, no. So I think that's going to be the trick, is how do we keep that feeling of carnivalesque? And I think maybe one way to do that is to slowly introduce one rule change at a time. So what you're actually doing is getting, a group of people who at the start think they belong to one culture, they think they're playing one particular type of game. You modify, slowly. And then, after several rounds, several iterations, several loops, they realize, actually, I'm playing a different game, a different set of rules.
We're slowly sneaking a controller in their hands.
Control. I mean, it's true that Vitor was talking about images versus words. And it's true that when you said this, and Rilla, after you jumped on it, like, I may, because it was difficult for them to get them to act, non-actors at the beginning, because there's young people, they have the fear of ridicule, right? And the carnavalesque is like, well, fine, you could be ridiculed. Everything is upended. And it might be an interesting exercise if they're going to talk about their day and their bad day or what they're suffering, that whenever it's negative, instead of saying it, they have to act it, or they have to draw it, to introduce a kind of a game, playful constraint. But what does this do? It gets them to draw images on paper, or to, like make faces and emote their emotions, and, play their oppressions, I've been reading a lot of Augusto Boal, which comes from your neck of the woods in Brazil, and who's super important in what I've been researching. And that could be a way to integrate that if they, all of a sudden, whenever they talk bad stuff, they have to emote it. So then you kind of gradually get people to start playing or acting with images.
It's good you spoke about Augusto Boal, né? Augusto Boal wrote this idea of the theater of the oppressed, which was a very famous theater method for liberation. I think that's the same idea that we are debating here. How can we use video games and movies and TikToks for liberation instead of enslavement, instead of and Augusto Boal, he wrote his work after Paulo Freire, which was this very big Brazilian educator and pedagogist, because Freire had written The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So Boal wrote The Theater of the Oppressed after Freire. And basically, and to make a long story short, Freire is discussing what is the pedagogy for liberation and what is the pedagogy for enslavement? How do you enslave or colonize or dominate or, prescribe the behavior of a person? And how do you make her rule her own behavior? And how do you make the person think by herself? And how do you make the person develop her own autonomy, her own psychological autonomy? So later, many years later, Freire wrote the pedagogy for autonomy. So and Freire brings mainly the idea of dialoguing as a liberation process, dialoguing as a way to learn how to think, dialoguing as a way to learn how to coordinate your own behavior. And that's very, very serious. And that's also touches in our neurotic Western mind that was conditioned by 10 commandments, not 10, more than 500 commandments from the Old Testament and the Moses, the Moses religion. So all is written, and you can't say that, you can't do that, and you can't touch this, and you can't speak that, and no. And this makes us a neurotic mind that is always following rules and doesn't think by yourself. So the idea of Dionysius, the idea of carnivalization of the world, the idea of bringing culture, of bringing community, of bringing people together, is the idea of dialoguing, is the idea of listening, understanding, and changing your idea and speaking again, and then people learn what you said and they change themselves and they speak again, and then we start learning together and we start living together and we start doing affection pacts, pacts of affection. Images are very important because images are affections. So as more images you are distributing in a community, it means the more affections you are distributing in the community. And if people accept those images, they are accepting your affection. They're accepting an affection relationship. That's how they win elections. When you put a huge amount of pictures and images everywhere and everybody seeing it, people get connected to those images and they get affectively connected. And when they go for the voting, they vote in the image that they had seen more abundantly before. So this idea that we have to make a pedagogy for autonomy. How can we make those electronic experiences as pedagogies for autonomy? How can we dialogue with the gamers? How can we dialogue with the community? How can we dialogue with people in the family, with the people in the suburban areas, that people that had been excluded from the cultural mainstream? Because that's how you bring them in, and that's how you change your own culture and you change your own idea, and that's how you produce community through dialoguing and mental health and health. Health is dialoguing, and disease is monologuing, as Boal said. A monologue is oppression, and dialoguing is liberation. So this is a huge challenge. How do we dialogue through the machines, with the machines?
Yeah, that's exactly what Mikhail Bakhtin said about the carnivalesque. The whole dialogue was against the oppressive power and as a means of freedom.
Yes.
I'm just going to throw a little suggestion. Like, if I were to try a practical thing, like if I were to invent a TikTok challenge, because you do it individually and you shoot it out there and you put the names. One way that I could try, and I have a group this afternoon that's coming in of young people from another youth center, so I don't know, I'll pitch it to them, would be that, yes, you keep the constraints of the TikTok, the 34 seconds. You could go to a minute, but that's the ideal. You need to express what you're doing in the first 3 seconds. But maybe one activity would be that you do this TikTok with your friends or family, so that it forces you to, if we did a TikTok here, us 3 of us, before shooting it, it forces us to do something. If I'm gonna sing badly and make you laugh, or you were talking about your victory conditions or something like that, right? Or I'm gonna there was a little ritual spell we called Dreadbane, which is like, if you have anxiety, you're going to talk to your anxiety and scream at your anxiety. So the young people I work with, they love doing that. But if you do that with alone, it's one thing. But if you do that with a little group of people, and then they all clap, they all rate you, as a fun joke, then you put that on TikTok. Maybe that could be something where, yes, you're doing the whole TikTok thing, you're getting your dopamine, your hits. We put the different, how to put this in the hashtags, well, that's a different story. But at least you kind of did an activity in the mini community that could encourage others to do it. So that might be something, I don't know, I would want to try, because it's trying to be like, well, we're putting a mini narrative out there and it may encourage people to congregate in their little clusters. So that's a cheap solution, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's
very potent. That's very potent, because if you root your action in the community, you have a whole different scenario. So you are working bottom top. You are working from the community, from the life of people into the web. That's I've been doing a lot, and people love it, and they love being seen in the screen, and they love interacting with other people. But you have to secure, I think, this community basis, as Freire said, a circle of culture, where you have improvisation, where you have open dialogues, where you have free association of ideas. As Freud said that when you have psychotherapy, you are accessing the unconscious through the free association of words, the free association of ideas. When Jung brought his contribution, he would say it's a free association of images. There are trains of images that are invading us. So you have to have a basis, like a therapeutic basis, or an improvisative basis, a dialogic basis, where you are in the community with the families and you are in the real life of people. And out of that, you start producing actions and games and events. And that's very powerful, because this will make those images of the community, the memories of the community, circulate and affect on other people and affect other communities. And it's a very clear, and many times I had patients who started with the theater and playing in the theater, and all the times I interviewed them and I filmed them and I published them talking about their own story and their own trajectory, what happened, how they arrived there. And people love seeing themselves in the screen when it's well produced, of course, because if you do a bad production, that will be an unpleasant experience for the people. But if you do it minimally, in a minimum quality, there are very clear anamnesis effect, and there is a very clear fixation of memories. When a person sees herself doing something in the screen, she will remember that for the rest of her life, usually. So this is a very powerful way to bring memories and fix memories for the community. And that's what our media is not doing, because they don't root their actions in the communities and in the real people. They do it with a celebrity, like a celebrity market. So you have very small community of celebrities that are being filmed and published, and their images are being vehiculated all the time. And when people look into the celebrity, here in Brazil, that's very clear. We have a Black population and blonde, and usually blonde celebrities. So when a Black girl looks to a blonde celebrity, she says, it's not me. I am the other. I am the what. And when you put a Black actress or a Black celebrity, the girl looks into the Black artist and says, that's me. And that's my identity. That's my story. So that's why public movies and public images are so important, because they are building memories and they are building identities of the people, of the children, of the adolescents. And these people who is going crazy right now, they have blockages in their memories because of that, because of a very poor cultural experience. of a very alienated cultural experience. And I think that the internet and the electronic and the games, they are very welcome if they keep this observation that they are reinforcing images, reinforcing memories, reinforcing ideas. Like we have this whole games about winning and guns and wars. And what if we did a game before the war culture? A game that would involve cooperation, a game that would involve union, a game that would involve community work, that would involve cultural actions, creation, theater, music, dance, poetry, isn't it? We have to do it before the patriarchal mind. The patriarchal mind, the masculine, the excessively masculine mind, which is what Freud called the psychopathology of civilization, is 40,000 years old. How can we go further than that? 3 million years ago, what kind of primate games can we understand? What kind of cooperation games can we envision that are that can generate loops, that can generate enthusiasm, that can generate gratification for groups and communities? We are in the start of this talk, isn't it? It's a very promising field. In the future, it's very likely that these games and the internet will be used for health promotion instead of disease promotion. So I think this is a very good debate.
I want to pick up on this on the idea of featuring community in the video, because I agree that, especially at the beginning, like if you're trying to get some kind of TikTok movement happening, then certainly it makes sense to ground that within an existing community. If that's, for instance, participants of a particular workshop, or simply if it's the people who you pull into the video with you. But I think we also need to think about realistically what's going to happen once those videos get circulated. Because the people who are watching it at their end, they aren't necessarily going to be in a position where they feel safe bringing other people into the video with them. Like, for instance, suppose you have aspects of your identity that you don't want to share with your family, but you live at home, right? You can't just pull your mother and your father into the video and act out your most bombastic self. You simply can't do that. So I think that therefore, like, it is helpful to show that this is grounded in community, but also to communicate that the community itself can be grown, and it is possible to connect both at an individual and a communal layer. And this relates to what Vitor was saying about being able to see representations essentially of yourself. Okay, you might not have them in front of your face, but certainly with the far reaches of the internet, of social media, you will find someone who looks like you. So part of it is like, how do we use the affordances of these platforms to support both an individual connection and a communal one? I bring up the individual connection is really important, because my reaction to what Annabelle, okay, one of your participants, chose to reveal about herself, I was particularly moved because she was so brave to share what had happened to her. Okay, now let's be clear. She wasn't sharing that with me. She was sharing that with people in the room at the time. She was opening herself up to people in the room and to you, not to me. But when I watch that as an external party, I feel like we're at a disequilibrium, because she has shared something so vulnerable with me and I have not shared back. So in that moment, that's what makes me want to share as well. So that is the idea of the individual connection, but then also acknowledging that we can be community together.
Yeah, it's as if you're joining her thing, or her quest, or her community, maybe. And that could be woven into game mechanics.
You're joining her party.
You're joining her party, right?
Yes, there's nothing more Dungeons and Dragons than that, than joining a party.
Yeah, because it's true that in there's a notion of collaboration in games, but also, dares and challenges, and particularly for young people, okay, so let's say Annabelle did this, and you were naturally, by empathy, encouraged to do it. I'll see this afternoon with the other group of young people, same type of city, they're not from more rural areas, but I'll ask them, I'll see if they respond to a challenge, to be like, okay, do you have the guts to do it? Like, if she's brave, will you do it? Because if you do it, she will see it. Yeah. Like, she will recognize you. She will kind of like put that badge. She'll be part of the thing, and you'll be part of that thing. Like, okay, you've got the badge of protection from self-poison, let's say. I don't know. I'm just like, so that's what, that's why you're here too. It's like we're playing at this to be like, okay, what are like simple constraints, mechanics, and it doesn't have to be a challenge or a provocation, but some might react well to that. Young women, young men, depends. Yes, so she joins the community. Sorry, yeah, that would be the thing.
I was just going to say that there's the aspect of, joining, sharing, competing. Those are all aspects that band people together, because there is, good competition, just like there is bad. But if you can foster an ecosystem that pushes positive competition, in order to achieve good things, I think that's where we rejoin Victor, where games can be a vector for good rather than destructiveness. By putting people and opening a dialogue, making sure it's two ways, like he was saying. So it is. I think that's where the recipe is for success in this case.
I found that you've seen this, like the competition right now, unfortunately, is about appearance and wealth, and on social media displaying your abs or your clothes, your youth, right, or your coolness, and that's why we all feel like shit when we watch this. Using the dialogical carnivalesque aspect, I found it interesting, and we only scratched the surface, that when you embrace your ridicule, when you show your frailties and your weaknesses, then you could engage in a competition, because then you could be bombastic and be like, well, I'm going to go even deeper in revealing how insecure or fragile, and then it's not damaging to the other. Then the other is going to be like, oh yeah, it's okay to do that. So that's something I'd like to explore.
I think that's where I think the gold mine in here is that you're flipping the shock value scenario, that because ultimately the meta ecosystem of TikTok is about getting views, and to get more views you need to harness shock value, and to do that you need to do increasingly bad things or risky things or so. But if you flip that on its head and you say, no, in our case you do chase shock value, but for self-cure, so for good rather than for purely
image, ego,
narcissistic aims.
I try to do that. I try to do that with my work here in Rio, as I'm facing a lot of patients and families and communities and people. Whenever I find something important, I publish it. If you go into my social networks, you will see I publish compulsively, because I understand that that's a way to share what is happening on the ground, and that's a way to strengthen what is happening on the ground. So if we can use the games and the internet and the movies to strengthen what is happening, the struggles that are happening on the ground, that's powerful, and that's interesting, that's real, that's organic in a certain sense, because that's what you see. And like when in 2014, when we played Hamlet inside the psychiatric asylum, I filmed with mobile telephones, and I started bringing movie artists to the asylum to document it. And we did several movies. One of those short movies went to a BBC reporter, and he came to the asylum, and we were published in BBC in 2012. And that was a major earthquake in Brazilian psychiatry, because there was this movie in BBC about a crazy group inside the asylum playing Hamlet with everybody together and all the player and the patients playing and playing characters. So that was a case of short internet movies that we crashed. We broke the algorithm, isn't it? We broke the control of the content. And after it was published in BBC, all the Brazilian media press organization came after us. And before they didn't came, but after BBC they came. So I started thinking that we have to play according to the rules of the system and do it the best way possible. And what seems to be very important in this issue is that you save the actors. You know, every human being is an actor, and we are playing all the time, and our life is a theatrical game, no doubt about that. But we have to secure the situation of the actors and the participation of the actors, of the people in the ground, in the sense that they won't be used as models or commercial actors. They will be the actors of that process. They will be the actors of that community work, of that project. And then when they become the protagonists, and they can be the protagonists in the game and in the movie and in the internet, we will have this autonomy gaining effect. The person emancipates herself. The person gets more creative and start to understand that she also can be a creator, that she also can play, that she also can dream, that she also can movie, then she also can be an internet actor, to use. Yeah. So this is the issue. What I see a lot in Brazil and in McGill and in Montreal and everywhere is that there are a lot of projects that go into the community, but they don't make a real pact. They use the images of the community and then they drop out. This is traumatizing, and this is reinforcing the trauma. And that community will never accept collaboration again, and that community will never accept that researcher again. So it's like an immunological organism that gets immunized if the experience is not well conducted. And what I see that is very important is calmness. You have the proper time to dialogue, the proper time to listen, the proper time to listen to the memories that may emerge, to the stories that may emerge, and how you publish that, and how do you deliver back the knowledge to the community? How do you involve the community in the publication of the data, in the publication of the work? In cultural psychiatry, that's a huge issue, because we have a lot of projects that do not engage in the community in a proper sense, and that makes damaging. It's like a magical error when you do the community work without, like I am here in Brazil for 5 years working inside my community. It is very hard and it's very complicated. It's a very violent community, and we have this whole psychopathology of colonization where people like to betray each other and all that. But I'm living here. I was born and grown up here, and I'm working with my families in a continuous manner. If someone has a problem, they look for me and they find me. So it's like a community physician, like a family physician. So this kind of project would be rooted in a community basis that is stable and it's working and it won't leave after the project ends. And you use the internet and the movies and the TikToks as ways to support and strengthen and develop the struggles that the community is already trying to chase. Now, how do you gamify that? This client of mine with severe autism, he has a video game in his head, and he loves making trickster, tricking people, and he loves the trickster movies in the internet. And how do we make a movie and how do we make a game out of that content with a trickster that plays tricks in the community, and that he will feel recognized and he will be thrilled by that. And other children will be thrilled by that, probably too.
Well, maybe there's a way to push engagement and participation via the reward loop, where when you do participate and you succeed your quest, you get editorial rights. In other words, you become a GM, a game master, just like in Dungeons and Dragons. So maybe if I did accomplish my mission, my quest, or I cast my spell right.
The workshops you did.
The workshop, I did the TikTok video, and I got maybe a certain amount of views. That was like the threshold requirement for my medal, my achievement.
Your badge.
My badge. So maybe that gives me I can be the game master of the next video. So I'm setting the conditions, I'm setting the rules for the next one that other players have to engage in and participate and now fulfill my mission that I told them. So what cured me, I pass on to someone else. And then maybe that cure works for them as well. So maybe that's how we drive engagement.
It's kind of mentor kind of.
Mentorship as well, mentorship dynamic.
But it's also ritual, right? Because if it's partly about, you work with what I have, the thing that cured my poison, then we are tying that idea of ritual and loop together.
We're iterating.
And we're also passing on responsibility, because I think that's really important, is that this is something where the community feels like they own it and that they're able to sustain it on their own.
Yeah, it's
you
not
don't need to
extractive.
keep animating.
It's not extractive.
Exactly.
I came, I went, I took the data. Yeah. And it reinforces the archetype of the wounded healer that Vitor, I listened to your speech that you did in Denmark when you went to play Hamlet several years back. A lot of these young people that I work with, they all want to be social workers, teachers, help others. The Annabelle, a young woman who struggled with addictions, and she's indigenous, part indigenous, by the way. And she told me the other day, we were driving them back to their homes after our workshop, that she goes to there's some rehab centers for drug addicts in Trois-Rivières. And sometimes she just goes there at night and hangs out. And there's people in crisis coming, and she just talks, because she's been through so much from the age of 10 or 12 and up, and she's 21, 22, she's super young. She just hangs out and she says, I just give them some love, I talk to them, and because, I forget the term, the technical term, but the experiential learning part of it, right? The expertise, she has like she just stands there, it makes her feel good. So they're all, they all want to do that. Like something relationship of help. So the idea that, yes, you complete a part of the workshop and maybe the next level, the next iteration of the game is like you start designing stuff with people, or you start that's interesting.
I think what's really interesting to note about your idea and yours together is maybe we need to sort of reframe the idea of reward, because someone like Annabelle is helping not because she wants anything from anyone at the center. She's doing it because intrinsically it makes her feel good.
Intrinsically, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, which is an interesting observation, right? If we're dealing in these spaces, we actually don't need external reward to reinforce us to keep doing it. We keep doing it because we know it's the right thing to do. So, I like the idea of the reward therefore being pitched almost altruistically, because I think, that would work for this community.
It's a built-in system in humanity to be altruistic and to want to share positive experiences. So maybe that's where your reward system is already lying. It's grounded in reality.
Yeah, the idea of the wounded healer. The idea that every healer is a wounded person. You don't become a physician or a therapist if you didn't have a very crazy family, usually. In psychiatry, that's very, very clear. We go into psychiatry because we had a very crazy family and we are trying to save ourselves and save our family. But when you treat one patient, you are unconsciously treating your own family and your own traumas. That's why you have to be very well treated and well resolved in order to get into the job. But this idea that experiences can be formative and can be useful for the community, and how can we use morbid and disease experiences, like this girl that had been through disease experience, and now she is playing and she's seeing people and she's talking to people in a different way, where she learns and she knows it because she knows the wound, and now she knows how to heal. She had to heal herself, which is your story, right, Alexandre? You had a very severe, you wrote for us, bone cancer in your childhood. And that's, you have the feeling that you have a learning and you have conquered some abilities and some expertise out of such a dramatic and difficult experience. And now you can use this to help other people. So this is a very important thing to develop in communities. And unfortunately, the medical authority doesn't understand that. And they are always trying to do medicine as an exclusive practice. That's a disgrace, because every human being can be a physician, and every human being has medical impulses inside of him. And if we can awaken this idea of a solidarity, of healing, of co-healing, of collective healing, of attacking collective wounds together, that would be a major step and a major jump in public health. And now, unfortunately, I will tell you that the physicians will oppose it, because there's this whole debate that only physicians can treat people and can diagnose people, and that's a contradiction.
That's why we have to frame it as a game or a film or a narrative, because then it escapes that, I think. I guess we have to go here. In closing, it's
yes.
I have a fellow student who's from Brazil, who's a graphic designer, Tarcísio, and he introduced me to the Manifesto Antropófago from the 20s
Yes.
in Brazil. To free themselves from colonization, they decided to take things and do kind of almost a ritual eating of it. And I think there's something, when he said this, I was like, oh, there's something there to try to do the things we do, but through the games and through these things exist, right? The TikTok, they exist, the iPhones, they exist. We can't wish them away. So it's trying to see those hacks or little challenges we could do to engage in them by providing some kind of pleasure and joy in doing so for people to interact.
Subvert their negative power into positive, but
Something
use their
like
power all the same. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. That's all the time we have, I believe, because you have to go back to lines of patients that are screaming for the Mad King to lead them to.
I have a line. Yeah, it's not so vibrant. It's a lot of listening. You have to listen.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
So I'll thank you all for being here. I took a lot of notes, and if you're okay with it, what I'll do is, as I keep processing the research here with the young people and the ideas, eventually I'll send little group emails with like specific little challenges and game ideas for the young people that we talked about. And you certainly, before we talked about a couple of things, and we always have this conversation, and then we could bounce it with what you're doing over there with the theater, Vitor. When you have a second, just I'll put it up there. I'll put it, and at your discretion, just pitch in, and it'll just like get the conversation going, because we barely scratched the surface of this, obviously.
Yes, it's a very promising.
Yes,
it's a very promising debate.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Victor.
You.
Thank you, Alexandre. Thanks, Louis, David, and Rilla. Thanks so much for our online audience and the folks who stuck around here in the space for this conversation and brainstorm. We are going to close up the virtual space now, and we invite you, if you're here today, to engage with Alexandre's project for the last day here in Fourth Space. Thanks again. Bye, everybody. Ciao.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.